Here we are at North Shore Country Club. We're about to plant into these bales of straw. This is straw bale gardening. But what I want to talk about here is organic matter. It's an interesting topic to me. I want to show you how this straw is growing such a wonderful crop of mushrooms, as we simply kept them wet and added nitrogen to them to get them to start basically breaking down. When you talk about organic matter, especially in golf course turf, it's a very general term in my opinion. Organic matter is everything from roots, live roots, to the biology in the soil, to the very complex high lignin, high cellulose type material. All very different from each other, obviously, but when you do a lost on ignition test at 360 degrees, which is the typical test done to identify the percent organic matter, that's what you get. You get all those lumped together as part of the data. It's not separated out. I think that's problematic, but basically with organic matter and the complexity of the polymers that make it up, the high cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin type material, there's a pecking order with the biology that finds it as a food source. You should really actually one further step back, and that is if you look at natural systems, the ecology of, say, grasslands, there is an element, there's several elements, starting even with grazing animals who obviously eat the top portion of the plants, and during their digestive process they're excreted back out to the system and deposited and adds to the biology and the nutrients. That's one way the organic material cycles. Certainly fires is another way, and the ash that's left behind adds some mineral components, but also the char that's left behind is probably the most persistent part that's left after a fire. Down low near the ground, the flames get so hot that the material in that zone that's really robbed of all the oxygen burns off, leaving a charcoal-like material behind just through the heat. So I mean, these are all part of natural elements when you talk about grasslands. But then when you talk about the shredders that's in the soil, that golf course turf basically does everything you can to omit, meaning earthworms, the millipedes, centipedes, sow bugs. That's another group of organisms that impact organic matter and its cycling. So just like how we chew food, they're kind of like the shredders and help break down pieces of organic matter into smaller pieces as they feed on the fungi and bacteria that surrounds it. They also help the organic matter intermingle with the soil, like earthworms especially. So you can't ignore that, in my opinion, those elements. But when you talk about microbiology with organic matter, there's a pecking order. So just like you see these fungal mushrooms here growing out of the straw, it's a good visual on the idea that the more complex, high lignin, high cellulose type materials are really broken down by the fungal community. First of all, I'm going to have a disclaimer here that there's overlap with things I'm going to say. I'm generalizing, but generally speaking, you have this pecking order. So, for example, people that put sugars out, simple sugars, blackstrap molasses, they are definitely going to encourage microbial activity, but it's going to be a flash in the pan. There's going to be a rapid flare-up followed by a crash, but it's going to be a whole different group of organisms that are geared towards recognizing those simple sugars as a food source. That's not the same microbes that generally find this more complex material as a food source. So you have the fungal community breaking down the cellulose, the hemicellulose, with the enzymes it has the capacity to do, and then maybe the actinomycetes kind of pick up with some overlap there, and then the bacteria are geared towards breaking down the more simplified polymers. And it's important, I think, to recognize these things. I think turf grass in general tends to be a bacteria-dominated system when you compare it to, say, a forest floor. And there's a reason, because of the sugars that grasses tend to have, the fructans and that they are geared towards, really, in proportion anyways, raising bacteria in its system over, say, the fungal community. Obviously, that's not entirely true, because we wouldn't have fungal diseases in turf if it was totally true. But generally speaking, when you compare a forest system to a grassland system, that's the case. And so in my mind, the weak link in turf management is really that fungal community when you're trying to digest thatch. So we're doing some research on using biochar as a carrier, for example, inoculated with different fungal community organisms, rather, to add to the community, and see if we can cycle down this thatch in a more natural state and not rely on chronic enzymes or sand top dressing that simply dilutes it.